no cameras had existed to capture Roy Jones Jr.'s incredible feats of skill as he took championships in multiple weight classes, it's doubtful that anyone would have believed them to be real. Any audience member who had witnessed such feats would have been seen as that crazy old man at the bar telling stories. This is especially true for what I consider to be Jones' greatest and most spectacular KO. I'm speaking, of course, of the time that Jones knocked out Glenn Kelly with his hands behind his back. Jones could not have done this if he had not built up to it, systematically breaking down Kelly over the course of the fight. First, Jones used one of his most common tactics, leading with his rear hand. He could get away with this because of his speed, timing, and footwork. Jones would throw his right, and then use a quick linear shift to dart away into a defensive southpaw angle. He did this anytime he felt he was in any genuine danger of taking a counter shot. As Jones led with his right, he either targeted Kelly's head or body. Defending his head or his body was the first quick decision that Kelly would have to make every time he saw Jones flare his rear arm, but Jones would soon pile on more. Jones flared his rear arm again, but then shuffled in with the lead hook instead. Now Kelly had yet another variable to factor in. Was Jones going to use a rear to the body, a rear to the head, or a lead to the head, or a lead to the stomach? Now Kelly had to worry about 4 potential KO shots, all from the same setup. And unfortunately for him, Kelly made the wrong choice in the third. Jones connected with a vicious uppercut to the chin, dropping Kelly. Kelly got up and made it to the bell, and so Jones continued his onslaught for several more rounds. In the 6th, Jones used a lead hook to the body twice in a row, and Kelly defended wrong twice in a row. After the second knockdown, Kelly became extremely hesitant, throwing non-committal shots and simply shelling up, retreating, and hoping for the best. Perhaps he hoped to simply survive until he could get his legs back under him. But tired of waiting, in the 7th, Jones did the unthinkable. He stuck his chin out and put his hands behind his back, inviting Kelly to attack. Unfortunately for Kelly, he accepted that invitation. Jones slipped Kelly's jab, but it wasn't the exact angle he was looking for. So, Jones stuck his head out further to draw even more punches. Kelly again took the bait, and Jones' hook lashed out from behind his back. Kelly once again attempted to shell up, but, once again, it was to no avail. While it was true that Kelly was beat down and most likely still stunned, a large part of Jones' terrific knockout must have had to do with Kelly's inability to process too many threats at once. Basically, Kelly was partially paralyzed from information overload, as a direct result of Jones' brilliant strategy to make him choose between bad or worse. The result was one of the most beautiful knockouts ever captured on film.
What can a great fighter achieve if they possess godlike speed? Roy Jones Jr. conquered multiple weight classes from middleweight all the way up to heavyweight. But speed is no guarantee, and if Jones didn't know what he was doing, the one awkwardly stumbling to the canvas would have been him. A well-timed hard punch has ended the night for many up-and-coming boxers trying to spam high-octane combos. Jones did use speed to break most of the rules of boxing. However, he did so in all the right ways. So here's exactly how Roy Jones Jr. used his cat-like reflexes to ensure he would never be forgotten. Once Jones got a clean hit, he could sneak in the exact same punch again before the opponent had time to close his guard. Usually boxers vary up their targets and punch selection to deal with the fact that their competitor will naturally try and plug the leaky hole in their defenses. But Jones was so fast that he didn't need to let a good opening go to waste, punishing the same defensive mistake multiple times before the opponent knew the first one had even hit. Getting power from these super tight punches is no easy task, but again, speed is one big component of power generation.
As Jones slams away. The wobbly Harris against the ropes is down at the bell.
I think there's even a knockout where he throws about 5 hooks in a row, but I'm blanking right now if anyone wants to enlighten me in the comments. The next rule broken was that Jones would lead with his rear hand. What's more, he would throw huge looping overhands.
And he's breathing heavily at this point, and for all the punches he's thrown, a right hand stings Harris. Down he goes.
Talk about dangerous. This not only squared him up and left him open, it was incredibly telegraphic. Normally, this blatant of an attack would result in harsh punishment, but Jones' rivals rarely saw it coming. Now, if Jones' only attribute had been speed, this would have gotten him knocked out, but Jones was a boxing genius. Notice how he actively looks for counters to evade and then adjusts accordingly. There's always prep from the start, like moving his head offline or changing levels. And he usually makes one or two adjustments during the movement itself, sometimes reactionary, and sometimes just built in to stay safe. You can check out my book on head movement, blocks, and parries to learn more. Now let's look at Jones' use of mind-bending footwork to overwhelm and confuse his competitors. Jones was a switch hitter, changing stances at will and at times ending up behind his competitors. When I covered Duplessis' blitzes, a commenter described them as drive-by punching, and I think that hilarious description works here for Jones as well.
This is a round 2 action. IBF middleweight championship on the line. Thomas Tate in the white trunk with a black stripe, and he's down flat on his back.
He would move past the center line to linear shift into southpaw, escaping any potential counters and forcing his opponents to turn. As Sun Tzu said, if you make for the enemy's weak points, you may retire and be safe from pursuit if your movements are more rapid than those of the enemy. Really rolls off the tongue. Jones would take this a step further, retreating off angle to force his opponent to turn. He would attack in the meantime from his new position. Without fast feet, these positions are near impossible to attain. In case you haven't noticed, Jones mostly kept his hands very low and relied on head movement and long guard tactics to stay safe. This comes with a lot of benefit, like clear line of sight and unpredictable punches because the angles are strange. However, without a few key defenses made possible by his inhuman speed, this kind of guard could never have worked. Like here, where Jones uses the turn of his head to just evade a punch. This lets him stay as close as possible, in range for a counter. This was a classic Ali tactic that Jones borrowed. Another one was to turn his spent punches into long blocks and forearm bars. Stopping counters, controlling position, and regaining the distance. Last but not least, because of his blinding speed and accuracy, Jones could get away with setting up attacks off of some absolutely ridiculous feints. The wind-up punch is a classic, but Jones' masterpiece came from pairing his leading overhand rights with his gazelle punches. For both of them, he would flare his opposite arm to the side, meaning that the opponent saw both arms loading up and didn't know which power punch he was going to throw. You can look at some of my older breakdowns to see Jones' opponent's eyes looking at the wrong hand and adjusting their defenses to protect the wrong side. Now, Jones' most brilliant moment in the ring, in my opinion, came against James Toney when he used this same tactic as a taunt to goad Toney into opening up. And I highly recommend you check out my video on that fight to see two high-level masters duke it out. So most agree that Jones should have retired before he did, as he suffered a slew of losses and knockouts, and the main reason for all of this was the natural loss of speed that comes with age. This confuses people because they don't understand how there could be such a rapid decline. But the thing is, there isn't. It's gradual, but the results show up all at once. This is because at the very highest level, fractions of an inch are the difference between setting up a counter or getting knocked out yourself. So even a 10% loss in speed meant that Jones' opponents could then close the distance and land their strikes. Jones never really adjusted his style as a pro, like Muhammad Ali, who came to rely more on conventional forms of defense like a high guard. Still, I personally believe these losses do absolutely nothing to tarnish Jones' legacy, and for me, he will always be on the list of the top 10 fighters to ever live.
Roy, let's take a peek at the end of the fight here. You really landed a lunging left hook. It was kind of an interesting punch.
Because I fooled him, I knew they were sending him at me, so he thought I wasn't set, and I just set him up with a nice, beautiful left hook. Sometimes I don't understand how I throw it so pretty. Look at him, just a sleeve. Look at that, just a pretty. Come on, follow the champ. Ed Mustafa sending him at me. Come on, get him. Come on, get him. Hold up, champ. He gave him what he want. Here it is. Bingo. See ya. Wouldn't want to be here tomorrow.
Roy Jones Jr. was one of the most gifted fighters to ever enter the ring.
Cut from the same cloth as Sugar Ray Robinson, Muhammad Ali, and Sugar Ray Leonard, Jones utilized complex footwork and insane hand speed to outmaneuver and outperform his opponents. Jones would suddenly switch between patient and subtle footwork to aggressive flurries and risky one-punch knockouts. And perhaps there is no kind of punch more risky in the history of boxing than the one you see Jones throwing here. Arms wide open, chin forward, charging towards his opponent. A punch I like to call the dive bomb. The danger for Jones when throwing this punch goes beyond simply leaving his hands low. He's not only completely exposing himself, he's taking away his ability to quickly block or parry, and leading with his chin. By all rationale, this punch shouldn't work. Even with Jones' amazing speed and natural talent, this technique was insanely risky. So how did he pull this off, and why did it work so well? The answer has to do with Jones' primary weapon, his leading right hand. Jones used his rear hand the same way most fighters use their jab. It was his primary weapon to keep distance, wear down opponents, and set up combinations. At the same time, this jab contained knockout power. In the same way Muhammad Ali used his circling jab to quickly score and then get out of range before his opponent could counter, Jones would throw his cross to enter and then leave by a completely different angle. His most common technique was to throw his cross while switch stepping into an open or even southpaw stance. He would then escape by shuffling out to either side. In this clip, Jones lands with his right hand as he switch steps to a more neutral stance, and then shuffles out to the inside to change the angle, avoiding a counter. Here we see Jones throw his cross, and then step back into southpaw to avoid a left hook counter. This is essentially a shifting shoulder roll. Jones could also pivot off his lead foot as he threw his cross to create a different angle of attack and escape. It kept his opponents guessing, and was particularly useful against southpaws. Using these techniques, Jones combined his attack and retreat into one seamless movement. This is similar to the multi-stance style used by Mike Tyson. But whereas Tyson used to go toe-to-toe with his competitors and angled off to create openings, Jones would change angles to avoid counters and reposition himself at long range. That being said, Jones was also able to use his leading rear hand to chase after his opponents and set up combinations. His switch step allowed him to easily shift forward and chase after his opponent in southpaw. Jones' right hand was extremely versatile and contained knockout power. This left his opponents overreactive to any movement from his right hand at all, and it was this fear that allowed Jones to throw his dive bomb. Watch how Jones prepares his right hand to land. He wings his right arm, sometimes completely straightening it. He lowers his left hand and slips to the side, putting most of his weight onto his lead leg. Once he got his opponent wary of this setup, Jones would perform the same motion, but instead throw both arms out wide, shuffling forward and connecting with his left as a hook or an uppercut. Focusing hard on his right hand, his opponents would often block the wrong side. Here Jones spreads both arms out wide, and his opponent guesses that a right hand is coming, and covers up his left side. Instead, Jones knocks him out with a lightning-fast left hook to the head. Jones' punches were hard enough to predict in the first place, as they often began by his waist and looped around in entirely new directions, much like Canelo does today. Add on another hand, and it's easy to see why opponents had such a hard time predicting what was coming. Here, Jones does the same thing, but this time, he goes to the body. While it's true Jones had a lot of natural speed and reflexes, the most impressive aspect of watching Jones in his prime was his creativity. Many fighters are fast, and many fighters have great reflexes, but Jones used his in a way that's truly astounding to watch. While I normally encourage practicing the techniques broken down and then trying it out in sparring, I would definitely advise against that in this case. The only thing I can think of more dangerous than the dive bomb would be trying to knock someone out with both hands behind your back. Ever since the four kings of boxing had vacated their thrones, The world had waited for a rivalry that could recapture the electricity of the incredible battles between Hearns, Hagler, Duran, and Leonard. On November 18, 1994, they would get their wish as James lights out Tony and Roy Jones Jr. engaged in what was dubbed the Uncivil War, a fight to determine the pound-for-pound pinnacle of the sport in that era. Fans and pundits alike had been eager for this middleweight showdown ever since Jones crashed a post-fight presser, a move that sparked an intense rivalry. In the following years, the two operated on parallel tracks towards the #1 pound-for-pound spot, and now they were on a collision course to determine the best of the era. They say styles make fights, and these two were exact opposites. Though 26 years old, James Toney was extremely experienced thanks to a busy schedule that saw him fight nearly once a month until he captured his first championship. At 44-02 with 29 KOs, the Ann Arbor native had already captured 2 weight class titles and defended them multiple times with stunning results. His style was one of tanking terror, moving through shots with an ironclad Philly shell before unleashing with brutal, mind-bending counterpunches. With an anywhere, anytime warrior's spirit, he was motivated to prove that Jones was not on his level. That aside, Toney reportedly had an awful, arduous 30-pound weight cut to get to 167 pounds, something that Jones, who was moving up in weight, wouldn't have to worry about. Even with the 26-0 record and a sky-high 88% KO rate, many saw Roy Jones Jr. as a bit of an unproven commodity due to somewhat questionable matchmaking in the past. No one doubted his talent, blinding speed, or unmatched dynamic footwork, but they wondered if his high-risk, brazen, open style would work against the upper echelon of the squared circle. Toney was no gatekeeper, he was the final boss. Few times in boxing history has so much talent lived within the ropes. The mix of styles, so distinct, was enough to drive boxing experts crazy as they tried to imagine how the contest would play out. As boxing writer Bert Sugar put it, Jones moves, Toney is immovable. What no one imagined was that the fight would come down to one brilliant moment in the very early rounds. When fighters are this elite, the first man to stumble or show a flash of weakness might lose. The first bell sounded, and it was clear that as much animosity had shadowed the build-up, the two had immense respect for the skillful danger each was capable of. Toney started by mapping out Jones' attacks, barely responding with punches of his own, content to let Jones lead the dance. He deftly dodged and blocked, remaining stubbornly elusive to Jones' punches. When Jones threw his signature gazelle hooks, Toney ducked and pulled under with his Philly shell. For the remainder of Jones' punches, Toney found his nuanced high guard to be more than enough to get the job done. Now the champion decided it was time to switch gears, but for all of his defensive successes, the pound-for-pound great was having an equally difficult time landing on Jones.
That's not a problem, I guess, when you know you have a 12-rounder and you believe you can knock a guy out, and I think that's what Toney has in mind.
Yeah, well, you're not necessarily sure he conceded this first round. We're only halfway through.
He tried a roll and counter right, but Jones shut down Toney's signature counter with the mere forearm block. Both seemed to know what the other intended to do before they did it, like high-stakes poker players that are both using mirrors to peek at each other's cards. With 30 seconds left in the round, Jones tried a no-touch jab, breaking his rhythm to surprise Toney. He connected with a tremendous right that would have been the end of most of his previous bouts, but Toney rolled in time to take the edge off. And just like that, the first round, a boxing masterclass that few watching truly comprehended, was in the books. But typical boxers, a slow first round, the feel-out round, would be normal. But with these two boxing titans, it was astonishing that neither had found a single successful tactic on which to build. In round 2, Toney was finished feeling things out. He wanted to put Jones in his place, moving forward behind his two guards, looking to crush Jones once he closed the distance. But even though he could walk Jones to the ropes, he couldn't stop him from slipping away like a matador from a bull. With his offense blunted, Tony should have been able to look to his counters. But Roy Jones Jr. showcased his ability to turn his spent punches into frames, sticking Tony in place and denying him the movement he needed to evade and land counters. Their opposite defensive styles were more prevalent now than ever. Tony relied on an airtight guard, while Jones floated away from attacks using his open, long guard to repel stray shots. Despite these differences, both men were completely successful, resulting in a near stalemate. In round 2, there was still nothing of consequence from either side. But that would all change drastically in the very next round. Sometimes, when an opponent's technique and style is flawless, that's when you have to attack their mind. Jones started showboating.
Was actually just gaining his balance. Exactly. And now the body work from Tony. Some big headshots there from Jones.
Taunting Tony, even grabbing the ropes.
Seemingly thinks he knows what he has to do, and that's to put the pressure on.
He took it up another step, flaring both arms out to his sides, sticking his chin forward to show he was wide open. This was a tried and true feint he often used. Inspired by watching roosters fight as a boy, he would force opponents to guess whether a lead hook or right overhand was coming. But this was the first time he'd ever just stayed put, highlighting his vulnerabilities like a big, flashing neon open sign. Up to this point, Tony's technique had been flawless, but here, his ego cracked. Stepping outside himself to mirror Jones. Jones responded in kind, but this time, he didn't stay put. Instead, he hurled himself forward before Tony could get his guard back up, catching him flush on the chin with a wicked quick gazelle hook. And now, Tony was paying for a mental lapse with physical consequences, stumbling back under Jones' assault. Lights Out flailed his arms for balance as Jones tracked him to the corner, narrowly avoiding a follow-up hook and cross as he crashed into the ropes. Tony held onto them like a life raft, but it didn't matter. James Toney suffered only the second official knockdown of his career. He beat the count, and now he was desperate to get back at Jones. Even if the punches that Jones landed for the knockdown hadn't hurt him, the mental battle he just lost clearly did. He pursued Jones for the remainder of the round, but his tactics were no longer well thought out. They were rushed, thrown from rage, and simply devoid of rhythm. Tony would have to find a way to get himself back together, because Roy Jones Jr. was showing no signs of slowing down.
So far, it's been all we figured it would be. Jones scoring the knock.
Street, ring, anywhere, you wouldn't want to fight either one of these guys, especially Roy. It'll work for him tonight as well.
He is so quick. Tony is right now finding out that he may not have the quickest hands in the sport.
Tony's high-pressure offense relied on his ability to evade as he moved through space. His further ability to counterpunch kept opponents gun-shy, shutting down their offense. But this can't work if the opponent lands first, and that's exactly what Jones was doing. Tony had not regained his composure, and he was still rushing in, out of position, overreacting to everything Jones was doing.
Plus, to take some gate receipts, and there's Tony getting hit with some lefts and some rights.
Jones pulled further and further ahead over the next several rounds, building on his attacks to find new ways to leverage his pronounced speed advantage. Jones shortened his gazelle hook, trading a bit of power to accurately and quickly track Tony's pullback motion, catching him at the very start of his head movement.
So far, Roy Jones Jr., good left hook, and Tony had to grab on there. He lost 3.5 years. Tony's been a champion. And they're talking to one another now. Good body work from Jones.
From there, he added lead uppercuts and straights to further punish Tony's low head slots.
Tony, but not as big as it appeared.
Look at Steele, though. He's getting in the way too much here. He's got to let these guys fight a little bit more.
And that just fired up Roy Jones in the final 10 seconds.
When Tony tried to dip and pivot, Jones would deftly circle, sometimes all the way around to his back. Jones' ability to seemingly transport behind his competitors was always astounding, but no one suspected it could happen to James Toney. Toney's low stance was great for stability, but it wasn't ideal for quick movement changes, which Jones excelled at thanks to his high stance and natural speed. The Philly shell position relies on staying closed off by lining up your center line to your opponent's, but Jones wasn't staying on the center line strip. He sidestepped with nearly every punch, and as he circled, he turned Toney's narrow stance into a squared-up, target-rich liability.
Left and right. Tony getting hit by some big shots from Jones in the center of the ring. Left hook has been the best shot there, and Tony hurt by that shot. Swinging wildly. Some headshots, and they're piling up for Jones, the challenger. He backs Tony up, and this is not a scene that you'll see very often. Here comes Jones. Has Tony in his corner. Pounding him to the head, but left to right. Tony fires.
He's got to let these guys fight a little bit more.
And that just fired up Roy Jones in the final 10 seconds. A street fight now in the middle of the ring. What is Richard still doing there?
He heard the...
It's a 10-second warning. What a bad move by Richard Steele. I hate to say it because I know Richard personally. And right when the fight was beginning, it'll turn into an alley fight.
During rounds 9 through 11, Jones was able to just bleed the clock by darting from side to side, pot-shotting his way into a clinch, or circling safely to the center of the ring. Chants of Tony rang out through the arena, his fans trying to spur him to victory, to a sudden change in fortune. While he was far behind, he'd been here before. Down on the scorecards and a heavy underdog, he won his first world title with a comeback 11th round knockout. But that was then. If a miracle was going to happen, it would happen in the 12th. And in the opening moments of the final frame, Tony marched forward through clear exhaustion, poking out his mouthguard to gasp oxygen. He used his patented pressure and feints to crowd Jones to the ropes, but his opponent remained elusive, even this far into the fight. And though Jones was within minutes of victory, he still let loose with serious, impactful shots, but remained mindful enough to clinch whenever Tony got too close for comfort. But to Tony's credit, these tactics did little to dissuade him from chasing victory, even as his punches looked more and more desperate. With 20 seconds left, Tony whiffed a counter right so hard he stumbled into southpaw. Jones was on him with a Superman-like leap, and Jones circled him, slapping him with a cascade of left hands.
Get more aggressive in the final 10 seconds. It's over, and I think it's over for the champion, at least as the super middleweight champion.
The final bell rang out. Jones immediately lifted his hands in victory before his coaches lifted him, presenting him to the hallowed halls of generational greatness. The judges' scorecards made it official. Roy Jones Jr. was the new super middleweight champion, and the pound-for-pound best in the world. In the end, it had been a psychological tactic. What you take into the ring can affect the fight, a lesson we would all do well to remember.
Mike Tyson and Roy Jones Jr. have agreed to fight each other in an exhibition match, at the age of 54 and 51 respectively. Both are absolute legends, and both seem near undefeatable in their primes. There's a lot of what-ifs in the upcoming bout, from ring rust to age to exactly how seriously each man will take the fight itself. So today, we're going to take a look at how each boxer might have fought the other in their primes, in order to help flesh out their upcoming bout should the two get serious. We'll first look at each competitor's style as a whole, and then delve into how their styles might have played out against each other. Iron Mike Tyson was one of the most calculating, intelligent fighters heavyweight has ever seen. Tyson was able to use all aspects of legendary trainer Cus D'Amato's peekaboo style of boxing, taking Cus's every note on footwork and head movement to create a symphony of destruction in the ring. Tyson was in essence an aggressive counterpuncher, capitalizing on the punches opponents threw while backpedaling as Tyson drove them towards the ropes. Tyson was able to close the distance so rapidly by incorporating head movement before, during, and after nearly every single punch he threw. and sometimes every step he took. A great deal of Tyson's knockdowns were landed by a simple slip, or jab slip, followed immediately by a well-timed lead hook. Tyson's square, forward-facing stance perfectly complemented his head movement, as it allowed him to easily step in either direction, setting up dominant positions while Tyson slipped or weaved underneath punches. This meant that Tyson could use either an orthodox or southpaw stance to cut off the ring, chase his opponents down, or angle out to the left or the right. This multi-angled framework carried over to mid-range and close range as well. Once he had closed enough distance, Tyson preferred to place his back foot against an opponent's lead foot. This was a ridiculously dangerous position for both Tyson and his opponent. But not only did it effectively close his opponent's escape routes, it also allowed Tyson to adjust to almost any angle he chose in a fraction of a second. For instance, Tyson could slide to his left, placing his lead hand in a prime position to uppercut up the middle. Or he could slide outside to throw a lead hook around his opponent's guard, or line up his rear hand down the middle. If his opponent tried to pivot away, Tyson can simply turn rather than pivot back to orthodox, putting him into more of a southpaw stance. With this deep angle, Tyson's lead hand ended up further away from his opponent than his rear hand, adding on a great deal of power and altering his lead hook dynamics to be something more like a cross or rear hook. Since Tyson's left foot was further away from his opponent at the beginning of his hook, it was almost as if he were shifting forward from southpaw to orthodox as he landed. Tyson would also sometimes move so far past his opponent that he ended up switching himself and his competitor into a southpaw stance, kind of like going too far to the right on an old video game. Occasionally, Tyson's opponents were skilled enough or reckless enough to come directly at him, and angled footwork played a big part there as well. In this clip, Tyson's opponent charges at him, but Tyson keeps a cool head. He ducks low, then shuffles outside to avoid his opponent's attack, landing a thunderous lead hook while his opponent is still trying to figure out exactly how Tyson teleported behind him. But more often than not, opponents were left shelling up against the ropes, Tyson pounding on their guard with well-crafted combinations. Here, Tyson's hook and uppercut reinforce each other perfectly. His hook moved his opponent's guard to the side to make way for his uppercut, and the uppercut brought his opponent's guard in tighter to make way for his hook. Tyson would force a difficult choice on his opponent: protect your head or your body. I say difficult because this was essentially a choice between a concussion or broken ribs. Tyson tended to throw these combinations off the same hand, angling out to the right to double up on his right, and his left to double up on his left. If an opponent tried to fight Tyson at close range or smother his power punches, Tyson had two clever techniques to create the space he needed for a KO. First, Tyson would shift back into southpaw to turn a close-range rear uppercut into a far more powerful lead uppercut. This worked well against opponents trying to clinch, and once again, paired well with the hook. Next, Tyson could jump and turn offline to angle punches through his opponent's guard. Here we see Coach Kevin Rooney demonstrate the technique, which was highly useful for escaping the ropes. Tyson used this method to land multiple knockdowns as well. All of these components and more went into making Tyson's unique, terrifying, and intelligent boxing. Roy Jones Jr. was also highly intelligent, and like Tyson, there are few in history who could have had both the natural physical talent and pure creativity to pull off his style. But Jones' style was built more on speed and volume, with deceptive, well-laid traps mixed in to set up the occasional huge, fight-ending shots. Without warning, Jones could switch between patient, subtle footwork and technical jabs, to aggressive flurry and risky one-punch knockouts. The first thing to understand about Jones is that he used both his front hand and rear hand like a jab, and both methods were incredibly effective. Jones' actual jab rarely did much damage, but it didn't have to. Jones employed a nuanced, varied jab thrown from his hip or his shoulder, and his main purpose was to elicit a reaction, Jones could take a mental picture of his opponent's reaction, noting which way they would slip or how they moved their guard. The next time, he would try to take advantage of the opening that reaction created. But Jones also consistently led with his rear hand, using it in many regards the same way most fighters use their jab, but a jab that had the potential to knock an opponent out cold. Jones' leading cross was one of the primary ways he kept distance, wore down opponents, and set up combinations. To pull this off, he used a pretty unique piece of footwork, something almost the reverse of an L step. Whereas in an L step, a fighter shuffles his lead foot to his back foot and then steps offline to his open side, Jones instead stepped his rear foot up even with his lead, and then shuffled off to his closed side. From there, he could pivot away, or switch to a southpaw stance. But this was only Jones' most common tactic, and once he had his feet level, he could actually step out in multiple directions. In this clip, Jones lands with his right hand as he steps into a more neutral stance, and then shuffles out to the inside to change the angle, avoiding a counter. But here, we see Jones throw his cross, and then step back into southpaw to avoid a left hook, shifting back to shoulder roll. And here Jones shifts outside into a southpaw stance. Using these techniques, Jones blended his attacks and exits into one seamless motion. Eventually, Jones could lead with rear hooks and overhands as well as straights. In time, he had opponents overreacting to the smallest twitch from his right hand, allowing Jones to feint with his right to set up a hard hook or uppercut with his left. Opponents would inevitably end up adjusting their guard to protect the wrong side, ironically opening themselves up to the real shot as they did so. Of course, Jones could always still lead with his right hand as well, setting up two fight-ending threats for opponents to deal with off of the same motion. And these two setups allowed Jones the ability to do this. Once he got his opponents wary of both setups, Jones would instead throw both of his arms out at the same time. Here Jones spreads both arms wide. His opponent guesses that a right hand is coming and covers up his left side. Instead, Jones knocks him out cold with a lightning-fast left hook to the head. Jones was essentially forcing his opponent to guess which hand would throw the actual punch, and astonishingly, it usually worked. I say astonishingly because there may be no riskier punch in the history of boxing than the one you see Jones throwing here. Arms wide open, chin forward, charging toward his opponent. This technique only worked because Jones had built up to it by successfully implementing the previously discussed sequences. Basically, overloading his opponents with multiple threats until they were forced into a state of sheer paralysis. Shell up, bite down, and hope for the best. But just in case his opponents weren't confused or terrified enough, Jones added one more layer of complexity. Jones often began his punches by his waist, and then looped them around to come in from entirely different directions. An opponent would block what appeared to be a headshot, but take a shot to the body instead. Or go to block a hook, and take an uppercut. These directional feints are similar to many of the punches Canelo uses today. Add on another hand to this equation, and it's easy to see why opponents had such a hard time reacting to multiple potential knockout punches in less time than it takes to blink. By the end of the fight, Jones could literally score a knockdown with both of his hands behind his back. Now let's look at how the incredibly unique styles of both men might have played out against each other in the ring. Mid-ring, Jones would have had to avoid nearly all of Tyson's punches if he planned to remain conscious. But on his best night, he very well might have. So what you would have was two fighters who both had amazing multi-stanced footwork, with Tyson using his footwork to cut Jones off, and Jones using his footwork to adjust angles to exit or land shots. Jones also being a multi-stanced fighter may have given him safe exit paths that other fighters did not enjoy. What would have made this even more exciting was the fact that Tyson possessed some of the best head movement ever seen in the ring, and Jones possessed some of the best head tracking ever seen in the ring. So while Tyson would have most likely been able to get in close enough to land by slipping and weaving under Jones' jabs and leading crosses, he would have had to be very wary of Jones' follow-up counters. In particular, Tyson may have been prone to duck right into one of Jones' looping uppercuts, since Jones' uppercuts started off looking like hooks. But on the other hand, Jones' looping punches would have left very tempting openings for Tyson, who who was one of the best body punchers in history. A safer tactic for Jones would have been to exploit Tyson's crouch by stepping offline and targeting his sides, so that he could outpoint him and outpace him to take a decision. But this was all mid-ring. The deciding factor of the fight most likely would have been what happened once Tyson got Jones on the ropes. Jones usually got off the ropes by shelling up in high guard until he could collar tie or cross frame to turn his opponent, or by using a cross guard or Philly shell to smother and pivot away. Before he escaped, he would often flurry to rack up points, relying on sheer speed and volume to back his opponents up. It's difficult to see this tactic working on a prime Mike Tyson. Jones would often take glancing shots with these maneuvers, but a glancing shot from Tyson was something else entirely. Jones' flurries would have left him far more vulnerable as he threw them. Add on the fact that Tyson was incredibly precise, and it's hard to see how Jones gets off the ropes safely. That's not to say that Jones couldn't have changed tactics, but fighters do tend to revert back to their programmed reflexes when under pressure. Long story short, Jones would have needed to stay off the ropes at all costs, using his multi-stance footwork to exit exchanges and remain in the center of the ring. He would have needed near perfect defense as he wore Tyson down with volume and the occasional well-placed power shot. On the other hand, Tyson would have only had to follow through with his regular style and game plan in order to achieve victory. But he would have still needed to be careful about moving his head into power shots or letting Jones wear him down over multiple rounds. Will any of this factor into the upcoming exhibition match? Only time will tell. There's a lot more at play than styles, from age to chin to intent to Tyson's power or Jones' speed, or the fact that Tyson is much more of a natural heavyweight to the wisdom of taking a fight at such an advanced fighting age. But at the very least, it ought to be highly entertaining. And while I'll always encourage fighters to stay retired, I'd be lying if I said I wouldn't be watching on the edge of my seat as soon as the first bell rings. Thanks for watching.
From the Modern Martial Artist, this has been David Christian, wishing you happy training.